Welcome, everyone, to this Citations Needed live stream. We are so thrilled that you are joining us today. We are doing this to really talk about um, some of the immediate takes following last night's electoral victory by Zohran Mamdani, the 34-year-old Democratic Socialist candidate running Democratic Party candidate for mayor of New York. Won handily his election. He will be the first South Asian, first Muslim mayor of New York. And as you can imagine, the takes have been fast and furious. Now, before we get to some of what the media has been saying, I want to also remind you all that we recently did a begathon for Citations Needed. This is our periodic fundraiser where we really do hope that our listeners, if you enjoy the show, if you share the show, if you like the show, that you become a supporter of the show. And you can do that through patreon.com/citationsneeded podcast. We are 100% listener funded, so all of your support is so incredibly not only appreciated, but also very necessary to keep the show going. We cannot thank all of our supporters enough, and we hope that if you are a listener and not yet a supporter through Patreon, that you do that. And as an added incentive at this time, with the holidays coming up, indeed, if you join and you're a new subscriber or you are a current subscriber, and thank you so much for being so, and you change your support tier, you will be automatically entered into a raffle to win some sweet Citations Needed swag. Maybe a hat, maybe a t-shirt, maybe a tote bag. If you don't want to wait to see if you've won, you can go right to our Bonfire store, and that's just bonfire.com /store/citations-needed. You can see the link on the bottom of the screen there. If you just want to go pick up some swag for yourself and everyone you know, please go do that. That would be awesome. With all that pitchy going on, let's move on to why we are all here today, which is in addition to other Democratic Party victories around the country, whether they were referendums or in Virginia and New Jersey, gubernatorial races, there was also New York City, which saw Zohran Mamdani win the election to become the next mayor of New York, the 111th mayor of New York. And as we have discussed on the show before, during the entire campaign, and this is a guy who a year ago was polling at like 1%, ascended to the top of the ticket, had an incredible campaign and organizing movement around him, built a lot of power, built a lot of support, and has won the election. Obviously, we're going to talk about Andrew Cuomo as well in this, but to get us started, Adam and I wanted to just note a couple things that we're seeing on the right before we focus on the Democratic Party, or more quote unquote liberal media, and their reaction to the win. So, for instance, Republican Representative Mike Collins, upon hearing the news that Zohran had won, decided to tweet out a 3-word message: launch the nuke. All right, so there's that. But then also, Fox and Friends on Fox News this morning had this give and take, which we thought was especially endearing. Oh, I don't think we can hear the sound, but we can.
Yeah, it's muted.
It is muted. Let's try that again.
Look at those wonderful colors. They have a lot of colors on Fox News.
That's true. That's true. Let's try this one again.
All right. Well, suffice to say, it was something totally batshit. Do you want to summarize it for our listeners while we sort that out?
It's a very brief clip. It's Brian Kilmeade, who's a true.
But a lot of
Here we
Jews
go.
voted for
Oh, there
him.
it is.
And a lot of Jews voted for him.
And that breaks my heart.
New Yorkers aren't dumb. They got to elect who they wanted to lead them. And if he fails, they will elect someone else.
He will fail. Socialism failed in the Soviet Union. It'll fail in New York City.
Well,
We should all be rooting for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
we should all be rooting for the city to succeed.
Socialism's not going to succeed in New York if you want it to look the way it is right now.
Right. So that's one of my favorite clips. If you want it to look the way it does right now, which is obviously the entire point of any campaign, is to maybe change the
Right.
makeup of a very unjust city and an unaffordable city. But hey, that's Brian Kilmeade. Shit. Okay, so that's some of what we're seeing on the right. That is not why we are here today. Adam, why are we here today?
Well, I mean, to be clear, the New York Post had the hammer and sickle cover, which is now going on eBay. I think the latest I saw was up to $200. If you have one, mail it to us. We'll give you, I don't know. You can talk to me for an hour and ask me all kinds of uncomfortable questions. No, I'm kidding. Don't send it. We also don't have a physical address. There's nowhere to send it to. So yeah, just be clear. I'm in Chicago. That's why I'm wearing my Chicago Bear sweater, just so you know that I'm not acting like I'm in New York. I know I used to be Adam Johnson NYC. I've not lived there in 9 years, 8 years. I did live in New York for 10 years as I'm one of the hipster transplants that Fox News tells you is the entirety of Mamdani's
Right.
constituency. Um, and I sort of have some emotional investment, I suppose, in New York City, and obviously it's the biggest city in the country, so it
It's a
makes it
city that is
important.
still near and dear to
Now,
your
New
heart,
York,
Adam. I
now
know that.
Nima, you were born and raised in New York
Born and
City.
raised. That's right.
You were not a fake. You're not a country bumpkin off the bus from Iowa like I was, although I'm from Texas, but same difference.
Just doing the whole
So
secret
just
of
to be
my
clear,
success move.
I didn't want people to be confused and think I was in New York.
I don't
Because
think that matters.
well, I used to have it in my name, but also like who can afford to live in New York? So let's. I guess that's the whole point,
Someone
right?
should run a campaign about that.
Yeah. The rent was too
The rent was too damn high.
rent is too damn high guy was way ahead of his time. So let us yeah, so what we want to talk about is the way in which so-called liberal media or centrist media has approached this, which has been is not a freak out. It's not a meltdown. It's this very interesting kind of head patting.
Mhm.
Good for you. When I say liberal media in this context, I'm talking about the Washington Post editorial board, the New York Times editorial board, CNN panels, a lot of this kind of these patronizing interventions where it's
Mhm.
like, so glad you won, very cute. You had this kind of DSA thing going on. That's very lovely. You went too far with this, and this. Here's what we like about you, and here's what you need to do.
That's right.
Basically, in summary, and I'm writing an article on this for later this week. It's U.S. establishment media says, to Mamdani says all the things that made you unique and interesting and exciting. Drop all those and just
That's
become
right.
Pete Buttigieg.
It is
Um,
pragmatism time. It is disciplining
and
time.
of course, we can't say because we're openly ideological. It has to be, well, that's what's possible. That's what the
Mhm.
data says. There's always these
Right. You need
constraints,
results. How are you going to compromise?
right. And that isn't to say, of course, that the mayor of New York does not have many constraints. They do not have deficit spending. They're not the president of the United States. It's one reason, and I've said this before on the show. I think socialists running for mayor is a bit of a trap, because there's so many ways that the forces of capital and the police unions and media can pretty much make your life a living hell. And I have no doubt they're going to do that to Mamdani. And put on top of that, I have no doubt, and we can talk about this, Trump is going to send in ICE and the National Guard to fuck with him the second he steps foot in office. Trump has already said as much. He's doing that to Brandon Johnson in Chicago. And I will say that as much of, in many ways, Brandon Johnson's been a disappointment here in Chicago. Um, the second Trump started sending in ICE troops to harass and do, various things, you're very glad you did that. You had him versus Paul Vallis, because Paul Vallis, not to electioneer, I don't do that, but Paul Vallis would have been all maggot out from the beginning, and in many ways is. And so you kind of see the ways in which having that does make a difference. But there are tons of limitations on what mayors can do. Now, Mamdani, to his credit, has organized and structured his interventions around things that are doable. And I think, things like rent freeze for, the rent stabilized apartments being something that is both precedented and incredibly achievable and also very redistributive. Um, free and fast buses is something very much in his domain that he can do.
Mhm.
That is a great policy. And of
A,
course,
a number
everything
of
I'm listing
city-run
here
grocery stores that will keep prices
low
under
and
control.
offer competition in neighborhoods where there's monopolies, which
Mhm.
I have in my neighborhood. I don't know where Joel Osco gets off charging $75 for three strawberries. But these are all the things that the New York Times editorial board opposed, right? And what they do is they say he needs to focus on, what is it, cheaper bus fares, even though the whole reason why they're slow is because people are swiping, and the whole point is to make it go fast and to make it universal, so it's not easily nickel and dimed. Uh, they like his sort of YIMBY dogma because that's real estate developer friendly. He, of course, paired that with a bunch of public housing. So get rid of the public housing, get rid of the rent
Right.
stabilized, rent freeze,
Right.
and just do the sort of pro developer
Right. The
stuff.
things that are apparently realistic are the things that the New York Times
Serve
editorial
capital,
board
sir. Yeah,
already
don't
likes.
drop the whole Palestine thing,
Yeah.
drop the class conflict language, the Eugene
Yeah.
Debsey stuff.
Icky.
Don't do that. And so the Washington Post ran a very similar editorial, sort of right before the election when everyone assumed he was going to win. This has been the tone of many of the
Yeah.
pundits. I know Obama called him a few days ago.
Yeah.
Again, because we know Obama did not actually endorse him, it's very clear that the nature of the call was probably some version of this. I think that's a fair assumption to make,
Yeah, the
which is
Washington
the
Post
like,
ed board just to close that loop there. The title of their editorial the night before the victory was quote Zohran Mamdani's success is a warning,
yes, it's a
end quote.
warning.
Right,
Yeah, about
not to incidentally, not to the you know Democratic establishment power structures. In terms of having them then realize maybe that what they've been doing by trying to third way their way to victory all the time is not the way. No, it was a warning to say like, got to get this guy under control. So there are a number of different kind of frameworks that we've seen media react to Mamdani. And the first one is what we're calling calm down and quiet down, young man. And one of the most kind of salient examples of this was none other than Van Jones speaking on CNN last night, election night. This is Tuesday, November 4th, 2025. This is Van Jones. I think the sound is still not working. Let's try that again. So this is as Mamdani was finishing up his acceptance speech, his victory speech. Van Jones chimed in on what he thought, um, his take from what Mamdani was saying. Let's try the audio again, or I can just quote it. Nope, still can't hear it. Here, I'll just say it. So Van Jones said this quote, I think he missed an opportunity. I think the Mamdani that we saw in the campaign trail, who is a lot more calm, who is a lot warmer, who is a lot more embracing, was not present in that speech. And I think that Mamdani is the one you need to, and I think that Mamdani is the one you need to hear from tonight. There are a lot of people trying to figure out, can I get on this train with him or not? Is he going to include me? Is he going to be more of a class warrior even in office? I think he missed a chance tonight to open up and bring more people into the tent. I think his tone was sharp. I think he was using the microphone in a way that was almost yelling. And that's not the Mamdani that we've seen on TikTok and the great interviews and stuff like that. This is also Van Jones. He continued, quote, so I feel like it was a little bit out of character here, a character switch here, where the warm, open, embracing guy that's close to working people was not on stage tonight. And there was some other voice on stage. That said, he's very young and he just pulled off something very, very difficult. And I wouldn't write him off, but I think he missed an opportunity to open himself up tonight. And I think that will probably cost him going forward. End quote.
Yeah, now Van Jones serves one social and political function at this point, which is to scold lefties. He does an internship with an Israeli funded or a pro-Israel donor, pro-Israel funded organization with which I think it was Dropsite reported a few weeks ago. He was given a few $1 million from by Jeff Bezos to do some kind of fatuous
Yeah.
corporate
Yeah.
charity stuff.
He might not have, Mamdani's best interest in mind.
And of
I
course,
don't
he
know.
was
Or
on
maybe
Bill Maher a couple weeks ago mocking
dead
um,
Palestinian children.
dead Palestinian babies as content fodder versus real humans who really exist. He sort of did a half-ass pseudo apology. But of course, what he really means by that is, again, we're getting back to the same tone here, which is stick to the generic kind of rhetoric, stick to the happy-go-lucky. again, it's not like the sort of the corporate media won't permit some progressive interventions here and there with respect to reducing childcare costs or even like reducing bus fare. That's kind of fine. But the idea is that he can't engage in class conflict. He sort of starts his speech off by quoting a socialist. Um, again, it's you could say it's red meat for his DSA base. But that's sort of viewed as being, and I actually sort of did find the speech to be a little bit more red meaty than I was expecting. Which obviously, as someone very squarely in the red meat base, I was happy to see that.
There's that
You
Adam
know,
Johnson Van Jones synergy.
well, so I think the question is whether or not, again, the question is whether or not that reflect. We can debate whether or not that will reflect an actual policy once he's in office. But the general tone of this of these interventions, and you saw this in mini panels last night, which is, and it's been part of the media coverage of Mamdani since he won the primary, obviously, and even a little before that, which is this. All right, son, you're very charismatic. People clearly like you, but here's how we do things in the big leagues. This is not a, DSA cadre meeting.
Mm-hmm.
This is the big leagues. And I think he's obviously tried to thread that needle, not, sort of avoiding dumb mistakes, um, distancing himself from, let's say something Hassan Piker said or whatever without saying, I'm never going to go on a show again or disown him. But basically saying like, look, I did like the fake Hassan Piker controversy where they're like, Hassan Piker said America deserved 9/11, blah, blah, blah. And it's like Andrew Cuomo was on Bill Maher like a year ago, and Bill Maher said that the 9/11 hijackers were not cowardly, and then he thought they were courageous. I mean, we could do this all day, right? But only one person, of course, gets these kind of guilt by association. Because that's the thing with Mamdani is they can never actually find anything he said that was actually offensive, much less anti-Semitic. So they constantly had to do guilt by association. Will you condemn the globalized intifada? Not something he ever said. Will you condemn this person? Everything this
Yeah.
person said of
The
the
will
show
you
you went
condemn
on.
game, yeah.
And it's like if every politician has to condemn everything that anyone has ever said of a podcast or a television show they go on, then that is a very, very, very slippery slope indeed.
Yeah.
But they needed this kind of grimy, Muslimy guilt by association. And that was the sort of best they could gin up to the extent to which I think there was like 4 separate questions about Hassan Piker at the debate, the mayoral debate. You would think Hassan Piker was running for mayor. And so this kind of disciplining and scolding is going to be the name of the game over the next few months. The New York Times, that's kind of their central purpose. Now,
Yeah.
when I say the New York Times' job is to discipline Mamdani and to sort of issue these veiled threats, that sounds maybe slightly paranoid or slightly conspiratorial. But again, the New York Times would not put it in those terms. They would effectively say the same things, but if the New York Times editorial board was sitting here, they'd say, we think it's important that we, hold a line that promotes realistic
Mm-hmm.
and sustainable policy that manages the, needs of business
Well,
with
let's
the
actually
needs
get
of,
into the specifics
right.
here,
So
because
like,
they literally wrote
I'm
they
putting it
literally
in.
wrote something, and so we can get there. But first, there's this other line, this other kind of theme that we're seeing in post-election media. Some of it kind of presaged in pre-election media. The idea that Mamdani, and this kind of dovetails with the Van Jones thing of like, well, he's young. Mamdani should learn from, and then fill in the blank. And the blank is always someone, shockingly enough, to the right of Mamdani, right? He
All
needs to
right.
learn from someone centrist, someone on the right, et cetera, et cetera. So and this has been a really kind of common media reaction to Mamdani's win and the campaign in general. So it doesn't outright attack him, but it kind of, pretends to counsel him on best practices, good strategies, build a, team of rivals, right? In his new position of power and the way that he's going to govern. Um, you know, it just so happens, of course, that these strategies all happen to be pro-corporate, pro-cop, and fully dismissive of making essentially, any good or service like buses or childcare, as we were saying, free. We saw, for instance, right before the election, a November 3rd piece um, from Politico headlined, quote, "Why Zohran Mamdani May Want to Look to Toronto," end quote. And it argued that Mamdani needed to learn from Toronto's mayor, Olivia Chow, on how to govern. Now, why does Politico think that might be a good thing to do? Well, namely because Chow is a YIMBY who, quote, pushed toward a significant overhaul of housing regulations to speed up construction, end quote. So in other words, Politico is attempting to instruct Mamdani, um, when he's talking about housing, the way to do this realistically, according to Politico, is to what else? Deregulate real estate, right? Allegedly for the sake of housing construction to kind of
Right.
alleviate the red tape, right? But Politico has also characterized housing as a central issue to affordability, so as to elevate, again, the deregulatory agenda that they have, and basically dismiss the idea of free buses and other genuinely universal and non-commodified efforts to improve the cost of living as either unrealistic or uninteresting. And so the New York Times really kind of jumped into the fray right as the results last night were made public. Mamdani has won, and their editorial board publishes their editorial entitled, quote, How Mayor Mamdani Can Write New York's Next Chapter, end quote. And in this editorial board piece, they advise, again, as Adam gets to the idea of like, we're just going to give you some advice. Hey,
Yeah. Nice, yeah, nice mailship you have there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
yeah, exactly. Right. And so these are the kind of basic tenets of what the Times was arguing. Abandon your bold ideas, purge your staff of anyone associated with the DSA, of course, make nice with the rich, and cave on anything that has to do with Zionism. And then, hey, maybe we'll leave you alone. Here is one excerpt from the editorial board piece, from the editorial from the New York Times. That was published last night. Quote, Mr. Mamdani, who campaigned on sweeping promises, can build a more positive legacy by focusing on tangible accomplishments. He should take notes from successful mayors, moderate and progressive alike, including Muriel Bowser of Washington, Mike Duggan of Detroit, and Michelle Wu of Boston, who have delivered concrete solutions to specific problems. Mr. Mamdani cannot solve economic inequality, the problem that fueled his campaign, but he can make progress. He can build more housing. He can expand the availability of childcare and good schools. He can
Availability.
improve bus and subway speeds, end quote. Now, note that the New York Times efforts, do not endorse making anything free, right, Adam? You just said like
Right, even
availability,
though yeah,
affordability.
he did not run on these weaselly neoliberal phrases. Like he ran
Right.
on free shit, and free people responded to that because it felt more urgent, it felt more concrete. We have gotten years and years of affordable this and accessibility that,
Yeah.
and people kind of smell that bullshit more. And so the universal nature of the program again is what makes it both appealing, but it's also what makes it permanent. It's what makes it less susceptible to being nickel and dime out of existence or racially demagogued. And the New York Times would go on to say, quote, he should start by building a leadership team light on democratic socialists and heavy on officials with records of accomplishment, improvement, management skills. Now, by definition, if you haven't had a democratic socialist administration in 100 years, how do you, or 90 years or whatever it's been, how do you, if you're going to pull from previous people who worked in the government, by definition, you're going to
No.
bring in
They
people
just
who are
want Cuomo in there.
yeah, and so it's like be more like Cuomo, and it's basically like take everything that made your campaign fresh and exciting, and built the core base because again, over 1 million votes, 100,000 volunteers. I mean, roughly 10% of people who voted for him were volunteers for him, which is insane if you know anything about door-to-door sort of electoral politics. I think they knocked on what 1.6 million doors. If I'm wrong, someone please maybe it's 1.3. I can't remember the exact number, but it's some crazy amount of doors they actually knocked on.
But
And
these are
but the way you build that evangelical base is by people believing you're doing something different, meaningfully different, not incrementally, different, not sort of superficially different, not cosmetically
and this
different,
is
but actually
anathema to everything that the Times stands for, which is why it wrote things like this, quote, free buses could reduce the sense of security for riders, turning buses into homeless shelters,
right.
right? It also, kind of hemmed and hawed about the idea of universal childcare. I was like, yeah, I guess that's okay. But obviously what follows that in the Times is, thought process, how is he going to pay for it? But these are some other choice quotes from the New York Times editorial. Quote, this board, the editorial board, did not did not support his primary campaign owing to our concerns about his policy proposals and his inexperience, but we're rooting for his success, end quote.
Sure they are.
And then there's also this quote, Mr. Mamdani can improve life in New York by marrying his admirable ambition to pragmatism and compromise, end quote.
You know, it's funny. I love editorial board tones. Um, like they're just some guys. Like they have this air of like they're bringing Mamdani to the principal's office, and they're going to talk to him. Every editorial board has this tone of just it's anonymous, so it's got this vague,
Yeah,
authoritative, kind of nebulous being that's brought you in. And even
right.
though again, over 1 million people voted for the platform that he's offering, okay? No, 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 no. Let the technocrats with experience and management
That's right.
skills
That's right.
really run the show here. And all that kind of pie in the sky stuff that you sold the drooling masses, that's all bullshit. That's all out the window. That's all bullshit. Just do like a major trim down, capital friendly, capitalist friendly version.
Hmm.
And the whole time I'm reading this, I'm like, look, you're the New York Times. I suppose you're the most influential newspaper, and you matter because you sort of matter. But you're like, I'm just thinking you're like what, eight, however many people, 8, 12 people on the board. I think it may be 20. Like you're just some people. Like you're who voted for you. And who are you to decide this kind of to take on this patronizing tone?
Yeah.
Again, there's always this kind of acknowledgement that there was democratic forces that thrust this again because the New York Times adamantly wrote an anti. They didn't just not endorse him. They wrote an endorsement explicitly telling people not to vote for him twice. They
Right. And
effectively
and then claim that they kind of like will stayed at they like
well,
oh we
because
kind of stayed out
after
of it.
because after Trump, they were like, "Oh, we're not doing endorsements
Right.
anymore." But we're going to
But
write a piece that's like a thinly
anti-endorsements
veiled, right?
also are a thing.
And so it's like, we don't want to sort of own that. We don't want to own the ideological content and the ideological implications of that. So we're going to hide behind this kind of coy. There's these limitations. It's all about what's pragmatic. They can't just say like, look, we want you to take on this approach because it's what we think is best, because we're
Mhm.
ideological. We believe capitalism is important. Again, James Bennett, who is the former opinion editor of the New York Times, openly
Literally
said,
said, yeah.
we are a capitalist newspaper. We are ontologically capitalist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't use those exact words. We said we are a capitalist newspaper in 2018 in a closed door meeting.
Yeah.
It's like just say that. Just say like we don't like the socialist stuff. And again, we want you to purge anyone from DSA
Yeah.
and your government. Just again, despite the fact that and again they create this false binary between policy and management skills and being in the DSA. They want to paint this idea of this kind of grimy, patchy beard, IPA drinking kind of socialist who lives in
Yeah.
his mom's stepmom's basement versus serious guys in
But
suits.
then when you get down to it,
Right. Even though there are plenty of people in the DSA who know a lot about housing policy and know a lot about, I mean, again, there's a remarkable lot of these overly educated, downwardly mobile people who would love to work on these things.
yeah.
But they haven't worked at a real estate lobby, or they haven't worked for Bloomberg, or you know what I mean? They
Yeah.
haven't worked for Eric Adams. And so they sort of are deep, they're kind of capital U unserious. And again, it's like people can listen to that, and again, time will tell if he listens to that. But their goal is just purely ideological,
Oh yeah. I mean
and basically
and
saying,
you can
if you,
tell, right?
yeah,
Well, because when the Times editorial board writes on, crime, uh in this piece about Mamdani and what they hope he does, and they're going to hold him accountable. They write this quote: even though crime has fallen over the past couple of years in New York City, polls show that many New Yorkers remain concerned about it. Their worries are legitimate, end quote. And then adds, like with a sigh of relief, the editorial board adds this quote: fortunately, Mr. Mamdani has stopped using the anti-police rhetoric he once did, end quote. They also note, quote, Mr. Mamdani's number one promise is to make New York more affordable for residents. He should extend that goal to the city's small businesses, which are
mm,
also struggling, end quote. And so the last thing we want to note, though, is the the other theme we saw, which is this kind of general bitterness, like this doesn't really matter, or kind of making a case where there really isn't one. So, for instance, I mean, just to say on the New York Times, like Ross Douthat, a conservative columnist, had a typically kind of eye-rolly and pouty response to the win, doing a podcast episode immediately entitled, quote, Mamdani's victory is less significant than you think, end quote. Right. So don't worry about
yeah,
it. But then I
why
think
not?
my favorite, Adam, and is Liam Stack's article that came out just after the election, came out today. And it was headlined, quote, Mamdani's mayoral victory divides Jewish New Yorkers, end quote. And in it notably quotes zero Jewish New Yorkers who were like voters, who aren't leaders of national Jewish organizations. Stack writes that, quote, Mamdani's views have unnerved many Jewish New Yorkers,
Many,
end quote, but
many and some,
provides
many
zero
some.
evidence to back this up. And then quotes in the article come from four sources and four sources only. One, the Union for Reform Judaism, and it's just like a organizational, institutional statement attributed to no one, not a voter in New York. Also quotes the ADL's Jonathan Greenblatt,
Naturally. Okay, got
maybe
to talk to
different than
Jonathan
like
Greenblatt.
your typical New York voter. I don't know.
Yeah,
The
pro-Israel lobby.
UJA
Yeah,
Federation of New York, again, a
also a
Jewish
pro-Israel lobby.
organization, no specific affiliation or
Yeah.
attribution for that statement. And then finally, tucked down in paragraph 14 out of the article's 16 paragraphs, there's a quote from Beth Miller, the political director of
Hey,
JVP
you got
Action.
JVP in there. They checked the box.
That's
Yeah,
right.
they I will say there was something noticeable about the way in which quote unquote New York Jewish people were polled, which is that two early polls had Mamdani leading among Jewish New Yorkers quite by significant margins. Um, and then they changed the way they polled it because so this was the Zenith and I think QVR poll. I forget the exact acronym.
Mhm.
There was a pro Cuomo polling outfit that found out that he was leading by I think 13 points among Jewish New Yorkers. But what they stopped doing is they stopped asking people if they were Jewish. What they would do is they say, "What's your religion?" And then if
Right,
people
right.
responded, "I have a religion, it's Jewish." So effectively, they purged secular Jewish people from the poll. So
And you
Cuomo
can see in
kept
the exit polls
they
this
did this
playing
too.
out.
So Cuomo was winning 2 to 1, 65%. And it's very clever because again, and by the way, this is not a criteria that of course Israel itself uses. If you're it's considered more of an ethnic or cultural group with respect to Israel. You can be a secular Jewish person and go live in Israel. And secular Jewish people are how you get the 1 million Jewish people live in New York number that gets thrown around a lot. But they very cleverly reduced it to just religious people who are sort of self-identify as religious. This would, of course, exclude a lot of Jewish people who are Jewish but consider themselves secular. And of course, Hans van Hitler doesn't make that distinction, right? And that really doesn't matter. But they needed to kind of juke the polls a little bit to
Yeah.
make it so it was only. And you see that when they in the same poll how Cuomo's winning Catholics and Christians 2 to 1 as well. And you're like, well, that's a little weird. So, and then you're like, oh, well, there's a separate category for not religious
For not right,
that they do
right.
not break down into a category of secular or I guess even sort of moderate or culturally Jewish people. And so I think Quinnipiac did this, and those were the polls that people latched onto after Zenith and others had done the more secular minded polls because they realized it was deeply embarrassing that
Mhm.
Mamdani kept winning the Jewish vote. But of course, he's definitionally going to win more secular voters because they're more likely to be liberal. And they're more likely to be progressive, and they're certainly
Right.
more likely to be socialist. So there's a long history of socialist, communist, secular Jewish tradition. Obviously, that's one that you and I are more familiar with. In terms of like whether or not that's how Jonathan Greenblatt views it is a separate question.
Right.
But they were
He
completely
might have
eliminated
other
from
things on his
they
mind
were
when he's
completely
making
eliminated from that
his
from that.
claims.
No, I mean seriously, it's a poll that wouldn't include Bernie Sanders, and this they were completely eliminated from those polls because they were not getting the response they wanted to get because it didn't
Yeah.
fit the narrative, which I thought was interesting because again, you can ask that question in different ways and get totally different results. And my
Yeah.
assumption is that if you did include secular Jewish voters, it would probably be 50-50-ish, or Mamdani would be slightly ahead, is my guess.
But it was just, just one more way to say, this campaign and now this, uh mayoral administration, is going to be, might be divisive. I don't know, Jewish New Yorkers. But there were no quotes or any data about actual voters in that article. It was just, and we've seen this time and again. There were also articles we saw that claim that, for uh the gubernatorial wins in Virginia or New Jersey kind of were more important than what Mamdani did in New York, right? Hey, it's New York, it's liberal New York. Everyone is, a trans purple-haired activist
Right.
for Gaza, and
Don't
but
forget
in
Muslim
Virginia,
socialists.
that's the real race, right? Like that's about winning over people. This is something different, obviously. One of the
Forgive
biggest cities in the world, very diverse population, but this constant downplaying of what Mamdani did. So we're seeing the scolding, we're seeing the disciplining, we're seeing the, hey, this doesn't really matter. And then, we will follow more of these narratives and tropes as they pop up. But Adam, I think we're going to wrap this live show here. Please stay tuned, everyone, for more full-length episodes and news briefs from Citations Needed. We're now in our 9th season. As I said before, of course, you can support our show through patreon.com/citations needed podcast. We would love it if you did that. We are 100% listener funded. And the way that we stay that way is for you to support the show if you dig it. So we hope that you do. And just one more reminder that we are currently doing our Begathon raffle, which means if you sign up to support the show now or are already a supporter and change support tiers, you will be automatically entered into our merch raffle, and you will be hearing from us shortly. We are going to be closing that raffle this week, so please do sign up while you can if you want to be entered into that raffle for merch. So that will do it for this Citations Needed live show. We will be back soon with more content. I'm sure, I know we will be more Mamdani content, more non-Mamdani content. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all for listening and supporting the show. We cannot do it without you. We are so, so grateful. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter and Blue Sky at Citations Pod, Facebook, Citations Needed. And as I said, become a supporter of the show through Patreon. That would be wonderful. But that will do it. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm Nima Shirazi.
I'm Adam Johnson.
Citations Needed senior producer is Florence Burrow Adams. Our producer is Julianne Tweeten. Production assistant is Trendon Lightburn. The newsletter is by Marco Cardellano. The music is by Granddaddy. Thanks again for listening, everyone, and for joining us on this live stream. We'll catch you next time.